All right, welcome to Bonehead Weekly. This is Joe Lewis, and we're all excited to be
And
here. How are
apparently we
you
live.
all?
Oh, good. And we live in a world where only Joe can make the smart ass comments.
I thought we all live on a yellow submarine. A
Yes.
yellow submarine. A yellow
So, James, what's our topic?
submarine. Well, gentlemen, we've talked about a lot of different things on this show. We've had some laughs. The audience did, but we did. We've had some good times. We've explored the depths of humanity, and we've even talked about the afterlife. But one thing that we've never talked about is merging all of those things together. And so this week's topic, I thought we should talk about was if ghosts are real, who would we want to haunt us?
Oh, I
Like,
thought we were just stopping with ghost or real. You were going to have two people go.
no,
Well,
if we were going to pick people to haunt us, for instance, let's say to be our ghost pal, who are some people that we would actually want to haunt us? And by the way, actually, I came up with this topic, but I had a hard time answering my own question.
Really? Am I the only one who was able to I put a list together in under like 15 minutes. And
Oh
then
man,
I
I had a
have
hard time picking three.
I have several questions.
okay.
So, first of all, for the
Am I
parameters of this, James, do they have to be fictional or can they be real
I mean,
people?
I
I
was
was
going
thinking
under
of
the
real
assumption that they
people.
were real people.
I was going with real people, and that's what made
And
it
I
hard.
was going under the over under if Joe was going to pick English speaking Hitler.
He loves Jojo Rabbit. Uh, anyway,
But so they can't be fictional.
Right.
no, I was going with real people, which I
Yeah.
think makes it a harder question to answer.
It was not hard for me at
I
all.
have a ton of people, unfortunately, I do have a ton of people that I think it's breaking it down to categories of are they famous? Are they people that maybe we knew in our lives? I mean, I have like imagine it's a Reddit with subreddits.
Yeah, no, and okay, let me give you an example because I
I
think a lot of
honestly, I
people.
picked, and for me, just so you know, I picked like celebrities and historical figures, people that I would have liked to have known who have haunted, who if they're going to haunt me, because I mean, the people who I knew in person, you know.
Well, and so let me give you an example why it's a hard thing for me because I think a lot of people, if you watch this show, would think I would automatically say Harlan Ellison, and I love Harlan Ellison.
I honestly thought that's who you
I
were going to pick,
I would, but there's a problem with that.
There is no way you want Harlan Ellison haunting you.
just
No,
because he said for a short period, so just to deal with Harlan Ellison torturing him for
And
that
that's
short
another
period of
good
time.
question. How long is the period? How
well,
long
that's
do
I
they
don't know, and
torture?
that's what I mean. So my entire thing is like it'd be really cool
You were
to
thinking way too much
have
about this, Joe.
to
I
have
have
an hour.
42
No,
answers.
no,
I
this is
could literally make I could make several different lists. It depends
sitting
on how you go about it.
sitting and listening to Harlan Ellison, for example, for 3 hours. You know his lectures and his on the road when he recorded those at different conventions and stuff throughout his career. Those are all fascinating. And I'm so glad I got to see him do one of those, which is now available as a recording, and that's really cool. But I also know the flip side of that would be when he wasn't doing that, when it wasn't that type of environment, and when I'm like, I think I'm gonna go eat dinner. Oh, you gonna eat that fatty? I mean, not that he ever called me fat, but it's
If you
all
did,
of
you would loved it.
yeah, dude, he could have
He
got away
hit
with a
you
lot.
and you loved it.
Yeah, he could have got away with a lot, but I think, it's over time, right? It's kind of like we talked about before, and he's never going to see this, but I admire the living daylights out of Quentin Tarantino. I enjoy his films. I don't know if I could handle being, him being on, quote unquote, with me in the room for 8 hours and me not start to be like, dude, I'm an introvert. I need 20 minutes to just quiet. Just give me quiet for 20 minutes. And that's not him, and that's cool. Right. And I think that's the same challenge I have is that when I think about people, I really like their work. I admire what they do. There's very few of them, even those that have passed on, where I'm like, I don't know how long I could take it.
Well, you know,
Right.
like for yeah, because I came at this conclusion too. So, for example, like Robin Williams, like, ooh, that would be a cool person to as a ghost next to me. But at the same time, as fun as Robin Williams was, Robin Williams had a really sad side to him, and you know he had his Lewy body dimension syndrome. I think that's what it was called. But also
Yep.
too, he was like kind of sad behind the scenes, and you
Well,
know you got
there's
to
that.
take that into account when I put together my list of going, oh, I don't necessarily would want him haunting me because you know I went way I did think about that to an extent. As much as
Yeah,
I admire the man for all of his work,
yeah. Well, and that's even part of the, and I don't know, and this is kind of off topic, but it connects to exactly what you're saying, especially in the case of Robin Williams. There's that documentary coming out about Christopher Reeve, Superman. Um,
super forward / man,
yeah.
which I'm so
Um,
excited to see.
yeah, but I don't know if you've seen the extended trailer, but it has Robin Williams in it, and then it cuts to I believe it's Christopher Reeve's son. No, it's his daughter. It's his daughter, and says, Robin and him had a very special relationship because the
Mhm.
world viewed them one way, but they both had challenges, that were mental and otherwise,
Right.
um, psychological, and so
Christopher Reeves kissed Michael Caine. That was a challenge.
I mean, what's wrong with Kiss Michael Caine?
Have you seen Michael Caine?
He's
Yeah, he's
Michael
pretty hot.
Caine.
Yeah, he's Michael
Mhm.
Caine.
You ever see that secondhand lines? That earns a kiss, sir. That's a good movie. Good movie. You ever see that Dirty Rotten Scoundrels?
It's another
Good
good
movie.
picture.
Good movie. That Frank Oz directs a picture.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
anyway, but
So-
yeah, so I think that's one of the challenges that I came up with this topic and I really didn't went, I've stumped myself
Well,
because who could I take? So
should
that
I
was
go
kind of my
first?
thinking.
Then should
So
I
yeah,
go first?
yeah, why don't you kick us off?
I'm gonna go with who I just automatically when this came up. I'm like, this is my first pick. Don Rickles.
That's a pretty good one because Don
It's a
Rickles,
good-
I think, was Don Rickles all the time.
Yeah, that's the issue is that I don't know. It would be so much fun for about an hour.
I disagree. I think Don Rickles is fun, period. I think if you know the history of being around Don Rickles and how much fun he had, how enjoyable he was with the Rat Pack, how enjoyable he was with his group, he was just a fun guy, period. He doesn't necessarily have to rip on you all the time. That was a part of it. He was just a genuinely nice man who was pleasurable to be around. And just to have him haunt you and tell you the stories, talk to you about the stories of the Hollywood of old, and also at the same time crack jokes because he's one of those old style comedians.
Yeah, I
It's
mean the
just-
stories would be good. Yeah,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I get it, but in my head, that's not how it happens because he's haunting you. In my head, it's the first hour. This is hilarious, and the 14,000th time he calls you a hockey puck.
It still for me would be entertaining as hell. Because I enjoy things, Joe Louis.
If any of the three of us do,
Yep.
that's true.
Yep.
no, I think that is a good one because, and I think the thing is also he lived so long, and I mean he lived a long life, and
Yeah,
so
he
he
did.
does have so many stories to tell.
You remember that time we got to see him live too?
I knew it was
No,
coming.
no.
Knew it
I
was
mean,
coming.
who else is going to be able to give you the both sides of Joan Rivers getting kicked off Johnny Carson?
I know, right?
I mean, he's one of the only people that I think did both shows technically and got away with it.
He's also
maybe
one
you're-
of the few people that would insult Sinatra in front of other people and get away with it.
Yeah, well, and then he made jokes about doing it.
Actually told him, hey, can you come over to my table? I'm with a cute girl and introduce yourself and tell her you're my friend. And then he comes over and looks at you and sternly goes, Frank, what are you doing? I'm eating dinner here.
Well, no, and I mean, there was even he tells the story. I think it's in the documentary. Which what's the name of that show? I'm blanking on it.
Mr. Warren.
Mr.
Mr.
Directed
Warren.
by John Landis.
Yeah, there's that great scene in it where he tells the story about, he was smarting off to Sinatra and Sinatra had some gentlemen with him that may have had some weapons on them,
What?
and one of them started to stand up, and he just went, "Hey, hey, look at him! He's laughing. Sit down." And I'm like, you've got to have a certain level of chutzpah there to do that, and so no, I mean, so I
And
agree. I think as long as
there
he
was,
was
yeah,
telling
no,
stories and cracking jokes, it'd be a good time.
yeah. So that's my first pick. So who's next?
I guess I can go because mine's somewhat similar, and I put a lot of thought into this because I was like, who who could be funny? Because if I'm being haunted, I don't want to. I want to laugh. I mean, because I think that's it. I don't want to be terrified. Like I don't need somebody going, "Hey, let me tell you how terrible everything is." I don't need that. I can do that on my own. But also, who could tell stories? So I was very similar to you in this way. And honestly, Chad, I went a different direction. Somebody that's not known as being as curmudgeonly. But honestly, the thought that came to my head was Mr. Chicken himself, Don Knotts. I thought Don Knotts is not going to terrify me. He's
Well,
not going to. He's going to tell me stories. He's going to, because if you've read his
If I'm not
autobiography,
mistaken, huge womanizer.
if you've read his autobiography, it's fascinating. Um, and
And if you look at him, the first reaction is, huh?
listen,
he's a handsome man.
well, and,
All
and listen,
85 pounds of him.
charming as the day is long, but I think the book actually is over here on my shelf. I should have grabbed it. Barney Fife and Other Characters I've Known is the title of his autobiography.
I need to read that,
Um,
James. I didn't know you had a copy of it.
oh, it's fascinating because
I've borrowed
the other thing that makes him really compelling is he grew up very similar in some ways to me. Right, his family was, his family was poor. Um,
sharecropper
no,
like
actually, his
you
mother
are.
ran a boarding house. His father suffered from depression and would just lay in bed for times and then would get better. And I may be misremembering parts of that,
Ah, the
but,
life.
and then his older brother, who they just called Shadow, he says his real name, but he goes, everybody just called him Shadow. Like he would just disappear for a while and go to work. And Don Knotts realized he could make some extra money doing ventriloquism work and stuff. And that's how he got started. It was,
Yeah.
I've got to make money. I've got to do this to make things work together. And so much the same way, like when you read his autobiography, you're like, man, there's tons of stuff that he just glazes over in this book that would be fascinating. But again, all the behind the scenes stuff that I know about him, he would have great stories to tell about. I mean, just the Three's Company stories, man. Just all of that, all of the, and working at Disney and working at there's so many stories there. Hanging out with Tim Conway. I mean, there's got to be stories there, right?
He
And
from West
so
Virginia, or I'm misremembering that.
I think you're right. I think he's from West Virginia.
But I don't know that I know that. I know I could just click it here and ask, but I was just wondering if you remember off the top of your head. In my head, he's from West Virginia. I don't for
I
sure.
know they were his mother. I mean, his family home was in a
Morgan,
college.
Morgantown, West Virginia.
Yep. I was
I
gonna say
thought
it was near a college town because they rented to college students, and that's where he could pick up extra stuff. And he says in the book one of the saddest days he ever saw was because everything had went wrong. His mother had to sell her piano to keep everything going, and he never forgot that. And so again, I think there's something to that. It's a very human story, but at the same time, it's Don flipping Knotts. And
Yeah.
and I never thought about, but so as I was thinking, okay, who wouldn't freak me out if they popped up? Who wouldn't? And I realized I was like Don Knotts because I grew up watching him on TV. I grew up watching him on Disney. My dad, of course, constantly watched the Andy Griffith Show because it was what was on TV. And I was like, yeah, yeah, Don Knotts. Don Knotts would have interesting stories to tell. And so that was when I was like, yeah, he could haunt me for a while. It'd probably be okay.
So I clearly had all these questions because I
Off
said
topic,
several different.
James, did you know his daughter was in Hobgoblins too?
No,
Yep.
what are you going to do with all those hobgoblins? By the way, the hobgoblins made fun of him at Successor 3000. I just always remember that line. They do an entire song, Hobgoblins. What you going to do with all them hobgoblins? Sorry, it's in my head.
Joe,
Oh,
sorry, didn't mean to
that's
interrupt
all
you.
right. That so I going back and forth because clearly I had all the questions and I was trying to think of how to tackle it. And somebody asked me the other day about who I could have interviewed and haven't interviewed, and I've been really privileged over the years to meet most of my heroes. So I'm tackling it, I guess, in that sense of if because I was going with it in a funny kind of there's like, for example, Rickles calling you a hockey putt or Don Knotts going, "What now? Where's my ball?" And just having all that shit going on and kind of being stereotypical as they haunt you. But if we're going to do it that way in a serious manner, then I can't believe, James, you didn't go with who I'm going to pick, Vincent Price.
I thought about it, and it was very much the same thing. It probably was going to be on my list for the same reason Don Knotts. It's all the story.
The stories, yeah. So somebody asked me the other day about it, and I seriously was walking down Columbia towards my truck behind the library. And I just was, man, I don't know. Yeah, I got to meet most of them. There's a ton, there's a bunch of directors, but I would love to have spent a day with Vincent Price.
Oh yeah,
And we
yeah.
didn't need to talk about movies necessarily. We could have talked about art. We could have talked about whatever. Food. Man loved food.
Oh yeah. That
So
that
we could
the
have talked
fact
about
Being a candy spokesman.
I would have loved to have talked about even if his history of his privileged background, of where he came from, of how his career, whatever he wanted to talk about. Because I've watched a lot of his interviews. Specifically, you can find most of the ones from the 60s, 70s, and early 80s are on YouTube, or a lot of them are. And he's always charming. I mean, I don't know what he was like in person. I've never heard horror stories unless you all have.
no, no. I mean, and that's even Victoria's daughter. And if you ever get a chance to meet her at conventions or anything, do. She tells so many great stories about him. Um, and is really dedicated to keeping his legacy alive.
Hmm.
But that's one of the things that she talks about is like the amount of time he would stop. Like he never charged for autographs. He always gave them if he was asked. Um, and just there was something and she words it better than I will here, but she said, that he always took the time to realize how fascinating everything was. Like he never viewed anything as whatever. And
I
so
agree. There's a there's
there's
a gr-
something to that.
there's a great video of him going to and it's in sometime in the early to mid 80s before he passed away, of course. And he's at a art school and he's talking to a young lady about her art and then takes the time, stops, and it's the 80s. She has the punk, blue, whatever it is, just jacked up hair. And it starts admiring and talking about how much he loves her hair. Clearly, this man's almost 80 years old, but he takes the time to acknowledge it and make her feel warm and welcome. And I don't know. I don't think he was acting for the camera, but maybe I'm wrong. I never got to meet him.
No, well, no, there's a story and you can find it. It's online because the artist dedicated to him, and I think actually gave it to him, and then it ended up in a museum in California because I think the Vincent Price gallery is somewhere in
Yeah.
California. But he had
And by the
painted
way,
this.
really quick, if you don't mind me interrupting, just folks out there, if you don't know, Vincent Price's number one love in life, other than food, was art. He
Oh yeah,
collected art. He spent most of the money he made off movies on art.
and making sure other people could have access to art because you can
Mhm.
still go if you Google right now or going to Google, go on eBay, search Vincent Price and art. He worked with Sears, and you could
Yep.
buy one of a kind art through Sears from these artists that Vincent Price hand selected. And so you can still find them. I actually saw a piece the other day, and I'm like, that is kind of interesting. I would consider buying that. Um, because he believed everybody should own art. You should have access to art. You should have access to original art, not just whatever.
Mhm.
And but I forget the name of the artist. I forget everything else. But he painted what was effectively a ghost ship. It was a very cool painting. It was a cool painting, and he dedicated it to Vincent Price. And Vincent Price put it in his gallery in California. And I don't think the giving was, of course, recorded. I don't believe it was, but it was often said how much it meant to Vincent Price that somebody created art in his honor.
Yeah.
And there were no cameras, there was no benefit to him, you know, but it really meant a lot to him. And I think I think part of that goes with if you read his uh the biography that was written by Victoria Price, one of the things she says was that he did have a privileged upbringing in some ways, but then the Great Depression hit and they stayed middle class, which was phenomenal.
Hmm.
But it burned into him how lucky, that any given second it could all be taken away.
Yep.
And so he always appreciated, and that comes across in so much of his life. So I agree. That's one I said was uh circling my list as well.
Cool. Good job, James. It's your turn again. Or is it Jad?
Oh, it would be
Check.
mine. Um, so again, I kind of went all over my list, and I'm sitting here, I'm actually changing my list as we go. I'm gonna go historical, and I gotta go with somebody who's one of my favorite historical figures. Now, I will mention he has some problematic aspects to him, but man, I would love a haunting of Teddy Roosevelt.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. He's very problematic, and you better only speak English in front of him. But um,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he like I said, he has a lot of problematic aspects of him, but if you overlook those things, he did a lot of great things.
well,
Um,
and he existed at a unique time,
right.
I think, and I don't mean that, and that's not a way to forgive the negative parts of him,
Yeah.
but the man saved college football.
Yes, he saved college football. We wouldn't have our national park system if it wasn't for him. And there's many other things he did, and just and he did it by sheer strength because there was a lot of people who were fighting against him. He took down a pretty corrupt system in New York, by himself when a lot of people weren't backing him. And also just as a side project, like I said, when he wasn't being a president, he was off in the Amazon getting malaria and like
That's
As
uh,
one does.
just one does, like exploring. He was going on safaris, hunting animals. Now, granted, probably shouldn't have been doing that. Wildlife shouldn't just be killing animals just for sport, but just to have that man just sit down and talk and tell you stories and just deal with the raw energy emanating from this larger than life figure.
I appreciate the positive things, but I'd love to ask him about his bloodlust, actually. Some of his writings about war and the glory of war and about his sons going off to war to have their glory. I'm just curious about where that
Yeah, but
comes.
but later in life, he actually regretted that because when they all flipping died, he regretted sending them to war.
It's I'd like to talk to him about his bloodlust. I don't know another way to put it because the
Well,
man killed more animals than most human beings.
right, he did. And there was, if you know more about the history of the Roosevelts, there was something wrong with them in terms of their chemical imbalance, because if they weren't constantly moving and doing something, they fell into a deep depression.
Yeah.
Uh,
I
because
would like to sit down with the ghost of Teddy Roosevelt and watch Arsenic and Old Lace and get his response. Like it actually just occurred to me because I want to know what he thinks. How does that make you feel, Mr. President?
Well, if you
there
get to
was
do that, go ahead.
I was just gonna say there's a long history of alcoholism and suicide in the Roosevelts, that if they weren't doing what Teddy and all of his offspring were doing, which was just batshit crazy stunts and things, it led to those types of things.
You think it was
So
manic, like a manic depressive thing?
it was manic depressive. Yeah.
That's
That's
what I
exactly
mean. It
what it
sounds
was.
like.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, I would love a haunting from Teddy Roosevelt. Just absolutely love it. I can't wait to get one of my honorable mentions out because one of them is the exact opposite of Teddy Roosevelt. James.
James.
And this is one that probably people would see me picking. because Vincent Price, like I said, was circling my list. I would be fascinated, but I think again it would be a lot of. I think South Park even makes fun of it, but I think it would be a balance to realize the reality versus what's often shown in fiction. I think Edgar Allan Poe would be one that I would really, really. I mean, just to have those conversations
He was one of my follow-ups if you didn't pick him.
because I mean he quote unquote invented the modern detective genre.
Absolutely.
Um, but if you read his writings on poetry, or if you even read his critiques of other authors, he was brilliant. I mean, there's no other way to say it. He was really there's things that I read now that he wrote critiquing others where I'm like, you could critique people like that today, and you would be seen as brilliant for critiquing, approaching your critique that way. There's a book about him called Alien Angel, which looks at, I mean, just how forward thinking he was in his critiques and and his writing in general, but also how that held him back. Like he just couldn't play ball. He
He couldn't
couldn't,
keep his mouth shut.
yeah, he couldn't keep his mouth shut. He couldn't, and if he felt something was bad, he couldn't sugarcoat it. And 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 even before I read that book, often thought about the amount of, and if you're a big fan of any of these authors, forgive me, but I'm not. I mean, there's some of their writings are okay, but the New England circuit that more or less talks about how awesome they were and how all their friends were awesome. You've got Hawthorne dedicating a book to Melville. Melville dedicates books to Hawthorne. If they're going back and forth, and all of them are awesome, but if you're from the South, you suck, and Poe was from the South.
Mhm.
And obviously there's complications with the South during that time period, but I do think it's really interesting that I mean he wrote about loss constantly because that's all he really knew. Um, but at the same time, he was just brilliantly, quite frankly, the only way I can think to say it is, and not to say it in the 90s or early 2000s way, but saying it honestly, he was wickedly smart. I mean, he was
Wicked.
so smart that it just caused these complications for how the world saw him and how and his biggest mistake was trusting people. Griswold being the prime example, right? Rufus Griswold screwed him over, but had ultimate control over everything that he did. And so I think just having a conversation with somebody like that, it would be similar to Ellison without the Ellisonian factors. Um, Poe was actually known to be pretty kind to his fans. Um, and despite all the stuff that has been said since, he was playful with his fans. He was actually really in good physical shape most of his life. Um, but there's stories about, when the Raven was a hit, kids would, run up to him and he would take his cloak and he would flap it like feathers and play with kids basically. And I think that's really cool. And I think that would be the stuff I'd like to know more about. And I'd also be fascinated to know what he thinks about the way he's stereotyped now. It would be a fascinating conversation. So yeah, Poe was on my list.
And actually, which one would he be more proud of? Which type of story? The
Well, yeah,
macabre detective.
well, and because really, I mean, for most of his
James
life,
James really wants to get lady advice from Poe too.
I mean, he women loved him. Um, but you actually bring up a
The
good
ones
Yeah,
that were
they
point.
close
did.
to him.
Mhm.
You bring up a good point because I think for most of his life he was viewed as a romantic author, right? He wrote poetry. He wrote very few of his works are actually those macabre horror stories.
Well, in the end, he got the last laugh. Unfortunately, it was hundreds of years after he was dead. I
Yeah,
mean, 100.
because there's very few, but
No one
nobody,
talks about Hawthorne unless it's in an English class
yeah, and
or Melvin. Yeah.
nobody is reading Rufus Griswold. If you are, I don't know, you're doing it for a course, I have to imagine, because you can't go into a bookstore and pick up a Rufus Griswold book
I guess
today.
that's true. You can at least buy Hawthorne, but you
Yeah.
wouldn't be able to buy anything Griswold that wasn't some sort of Christmas vacation thing.
Oh. But yeah,
It's true. I wasn't even
no,
making
no.
a joke. That nobody's going to know what a Griswold is other than that.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah, true.
At the Poe gift shop, my kids got plastic cups that say Poe versus Griswold on them, and it's one of the only times you'll see a picture of Griswold, and it's just
Mhm.
because it's Poe versus. It's nobody has a Griswold cup by himself. So yeah, I think that's true.
Yeah. Oh God, I struggled with this one. Oh, because I'm fascinated by him. I love him. I've read so many books. James, even last Christmas or 2 Christmases ago, got me a book of his etchings. I'm fascinated. I'm fascinated by his upbringing, like all the other people. I try not to fall into these traps, but for him, he is one of them. I am. I mean, and I don't know that I would like him. I don't know that I'd like him. In fact, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't, but I'd love if haunting is, yeah, we can, I'm sorry. Yeah, we can pause. Yeah, so back to me just saying I would love if only it gave me a few hours just to hang out with Orson Welles. I don't even know if I
Don't
want
you?
questions as much as I just want to talk.
Wouldn't he just? So you talked about Don Rickles being. Wouldn't you get annoyed after an hour?
I just said, yeah, if it was
Or
just for a few, I even put the
because
parameter if it's just for a few hours.
Orson Welles, I think, would be one of the most insufferable people ever in the world to talk to.
For you, yeah, but
Well,
I
but no,
have a fascination with him that I would like to. There is some sort of, for lack of a better way of putting it, it's just a to scratch an itch. I would like to, and I don't
uh,
know that I'd like him. That's the reason I opened up with. I don't know that I'd like him, but it doesn't stop my fascination with him. It doesn't
well,
stop that he's an egotistical fuck, but he's also a genius.
no. I was about to say, and I agree with you on this. Actually, I when you were being haunted, I'd like to stop by and have coffee. And I don't drink coffee, but I'd love to because I agree in that he was a showman. I
He
mean,
was absolutely a showman,
and
and
and then so I
I,
saw, and I don't know if I forwarded it to you. I should have if I didn't. Those reels that pop up occasionally on Facebook, and oh, you might like these, and one of them, I did like it. It was Orson Welles. It was near the end of his life, you could tell, but he was on some talk show, and they had some up and coming comedian was the guest after him, and that was back in the day when you just moved down the couch and the other person sat near the host, and I forget who it was. It was some comedian I was vaguely aware of from the that time period. But he basically gets is out there, and the host may have even been Johnny Carson. I don't remember, but says something, and um, like the comedian makes some comment about, well, it's uh Orson over here probably could tell you more about food than I could,
oh,
and
I know exactly which one you're talking about.
and
Is it
Orson
with
Welles
Robert
doesn't.
Blake?
Yes, it is Robert Blake.
It's
You're
Robert
absolutely
Blake. It's
right.
on the Carson show. I've watched it many times. Yeah, or Robert Blake was being a fucking asshole and was
Yeah,
calling him fat,
yeah, and
and
Orson
Orson
Welles
tears into it.
doesn't, but he doesn't. It's literally like I appreciate, I love Don Rickles, but I also love people that can tear into you, but at the same time, seems so poised doing it. High
Oh, it's
class isn't the word, but
it's
if you
like a
could maintain your
scalpel.
composure, yeah, and oh, let me just done. You're done. It doesn't matter. You're not going to come back from that. Oh yeah, you're going to call me fat again. Oh, doesn't matter. I've won.
Yeah, he's
and
and I
and
was a
Orson Welles does it in that interview. It's just I was watching. I'm like, that's a master class. The
yeah,
debate's over. He won.
it's from the mid 70s actually. It's probably about 8 or maybe almost a decade before he died. The it may be right around the time he was living in Bogdanovich's house. And there's so many stories about Orson, so many stories about him being insufferable, so many stories about him cutting people off his life, so many stories that he made up, so many stories that other people made up about his childhood, about his dad being having him at a great age, but he was actually only 40 or 50. His mom died young, his dad was an alcoholic. He just knew and saw so many interesting things. He knew so many interesting people. He was very blessed with being at the right place at the right time for decade after decade after decade. He came from a privileged background that kept going, and he never really had money because he didn't particularly, I mean, he wanted money, but he wanted money to basically make movies, and a lot of them didn't get finished. But he kept still having a privileged background, whether James was talking about, whether he was talking doing talk shows, whether he switched to magic in the 50s when he couldn't get a job in Hollywood. He loved television. He worked in Europe for years. He almost burnt Bogdanovich's house down while he caught fire watching TV. And then on top of that, he would watch Rhoda and eat fudge sickles all the time. It's just an interesting cat who.
And then there was like when he was doing when he did oh my God, the main villain for the Transformers movie. Oh my God, the planet.
Something Prime.
No, it's not Prime.
Is it Omicron? No.
Omnicron.
Omnicron. Thank you.
Oh my God, I think that's wrong too. But anyway, when he showed up to do the voice work for that, granted, he doesn't do a lot of voice work for that, but he demanded 2 limousines, and they're like, "Why does he need 2 limousines?" He needed a limousine for himself and then a limousine for his wheelchair.
That makes sense. Mel Brooks talks about him doing the voiceover for the History of the World Part 1. He made $50,000. Mel Brooks booked him for a week for $50,000 or $25,000. I don't remember, just pick one. And they were done before lunch on the first day. And it's like, no, this is perfect. I mean, he's Orson Welles. I mean, how much better could it be? And he said, what are you going to do with the money? And I don't remember the caviar, but basically he was going to buy, it was all going towards caviar. It wasn't beluga. It was the one below it because he said it's half the price, tastes just as good. He's an interesting cat that I'm sure would piss me off, but if I had the chance, I know you're not supposed to meet your heroes, and I've had some good luck about meeting them. I would totally meet Orson Welles. Chad?
So yeah, talking about heroes, this one has literally been an icon my whole life, and I never got to meet him. I would love to have gotten a chance. Now, granted, if you know a little bit of the history of him, you kind of know that he probably wouldn't live up to the expectations. But man, I would love to be haunted by Mel Blanc.
Oh yeah.
Okay, I agree with Mel Blanc. Yeah.
Yeah. No,
okay,
I
thank
mean,
you
the stories.
So
I do. I agree.
I agree.
Yeah.
Mel Blanc.
Cool. I can't imagine the stories.
So if you, and for those of you who might not know who Mel Blanc is, Mel Blanc was the original voice of Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, Porky Pig, Yosemite Sam, Sylvester the Cat, Tweety Bird, go on every single Looney Tune character. Mel Blanc. He was an icon. He's still an icon to me. And he died when we were young, and we never got to really. I never, got to really know him that well. But yeah, just to have him haunt it, tell me stories, hear him do the voices, see him do the voices, because now you can see Rob Paulsen do the voices of the Brain, of Raphael, and Maurice LaMarche do the voice of Zoidberg and the Brain, and so on and so forth. You have to look really hard to see Mel Blanc do the voices of those characters.
Yeah.
So
and Mel Blanc is fascinating because he was those characters. I mean, literally to a large extent, because there's a story that Blanc told himself about the car accident, right? 1961. Yes. He was in a car accident. He was in a coma. And they didn't know what they were going to do because he was voicing everybody. At that point, I think he was he doing the Flintstones at that point?
I honestly couldn't tell you. I don't know. I don't know who he was doing at the time, but I know the story of he was in a coma. He wouldn't respond to anybody, but then the doctor, I believe, said, could you, hey, Bugs, are you there? And he said, "What's up, Doc?"
Yeah, he responded in character because that was so ingrained. Coma be darned.
Yeah.
I mean, it was, and so he ended up being in the hospital for over 70 days.
Yeah.
But it's his voice work that effectively brought him back. I mean, I'm being dramatic a bit, but it was so tied into what he did. Um, and he tells the story also that once he started to come out of it and he was doing voices again, they would even record at the hospital because they needed to keep the productions going. And I think it may have been the Flintstones at that point. Um, and he was shocked because when people found out it was him and who he was, he started getting tons of fan letters. They got thousands of letters at the hospital, and he didn't know what to do, and
Yeah.
what a big impact it had. So I mean, just a fascinating person who shaped a lot of pop culture.
Yeah. And a lot, and honestly, doesn't get a lot of credit nowadays because, it's just Bugs Bunny and Taz and Marvin the Martian. Yeah. But not Mel.
Yep.
It's just the characters. So yeah, I would love to be haunted by Mel Blancs for a well deserved extent of time.
I think if he's still alive, he'd clean up on the convention circuit.
Oh yeah,
Oh yeah,
big time.
yeah.
Pretty sure he'd clean up on the convention circuit. Now his audience may skew old, but
Now you actually can find it online. The guy who does Porky Pig now, I forgot, I'm blanking on his name because I'm remembering this off cuff. Um, he when he was a young kid, he actually got adventurous and looked up Mel Blanc's phone number because you could do that, back in the day.
Oh, and there's an entire story about JMS, John Michael Straczynski, calling
Yeah,
Harlan Ellison that same way. So
yeah.
yes.
Well, he actually he recorded the phone because he wanted to know how to make it. He wanted to become the next Mel Blanc. He wanted to get into voiceover work, and he called Mel Blanc's at home and recorded the interview. And you can actually hear this man talking to Mel Blanc and listen to Mel Blanc like actually pick up the phone and start talking to him. And the sad part is his mom hung up the phone, and he didn't get to finish the conversation. It's a hilarious thing.
hmm.
All right, James.
I actually mine was going to be kind of along the same
I was gonna say
topic,
my honorable mentions are insane, by the way.
kind of along the same topic because I was saying today, they posted today Marvel Comics. I think it's 85. 85 is what it turns, and a lot of people, correctly, posted 85 years and Tara Strong, who is a voiceover artist and a phenomenal talent.
Very
Post,
in more
um,
ways than one.
yeah, she's, I mean, just phenomenal. But and by the way, if you get a chance to meet her at a convention and you have children that like My Little Pony or Batman or anything that she's done, she will be phenomenal to your children. I say that because she was phenomenal. Um, and my kids are annoying. Anyway, uh,
Not just to you.
no, to everybody. That's why it's amazing that she put up with them. No, um, but uh, it made me think as I was saying about, well, I've written myself into a corner on this. Who would I say? I was thinking about Jack Kirby because
I didn't put him on my list because I thought he was going to be on your list.
Jack Kirby has to be. He was the artist. He worked for Marvel forever. Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko. Stan Lee gets a lot of credit because he outlived them. But Steve Ditko and Jack Kirby drew the Marvel universe back in the day, and I think that's one of the things that he was so creative, and his art from a modern artist viewpoint probably, he was doing comic book art in the 40s and 50s and 60s and up through the 80s, 90s. but I mean, he had a very, what people would say, a classical golden age style of art for comic books. So it's not for everybody. But I think the other part that's fascinating about him is the fact that, he fought the Nazis. He was Captain America. There's actually a story that when he was working in comics, he found out that there was going to be a protest, or not a protest, but a gathering of Nazis outside the building. And he was Jewish. And he was like, nah. He just went down and dealt with it. And there's a great quote, and it goes around every few years. Um, on social media, but it's a picture of him at his desk, and the quote is, if you ever don't know where somebody stands, if they like Hitler, go ahead and punch them. That's what they deserve, and go about your day. And that was his philosophy throughout his entire life, that there was no room for any of that. There was no place for any of that. And so, yeah, I think you can't go wrong with Jack Kirby. He created so many characters. He defined so much of what we now take for granted in comic books. But he also was a true war hero. He did a lot of other stuff, and he's just an immense talent that a lot of people seem to have forgotten. Matter of fact, I don't always agree with Todd McFarlane for several different reasons. And I admire what Todd McFarlane has done. But Todd McFarlane, one of the best quotes he ever had was, he was saying, uh, it was when Spawn was first coming out and Spawn was selling really well, and Spawn was a big deal, and somebody asked him what he thought the problem was with the comic book industry.
Yeah,
And
he gave you a Mandy toy, so don't say anything.
no, and by the way, I admire Todd McFarlane for a lot of things he did, but also when Spawn was first getting launched, he was cocky and he was arrogant, and it came across.
Extremely.
And so, but he made a comment, and I remember Wizard even had to say, and then later he clarified it, because he said the problem with the comic book market is it's the comic book store. People selling your books, sir. You may want to. But he later clarified it to Wizard, the Guide to Comics, and he said, "What I meant is the speculator comic book owners that don't read what they sell. They don't." And he said, "The people
Which
that
is a
don't
lot
know,
of them.
yeah." He said, "The people that don't know who Jack Kirby is," and that's the example that he gave. And I was like, you know what? You've got a point there. If you don't know, like, I love science fiction. I don't read Jules Verne all the time, but I know who Jules Verne is because a lot of people I do read kind of stood on Jules Verne's shoulders, right? I like a lot of H.G. Wells. I don't love everything he did, but I know who he is because a lot of what I love was built on what H.G. Wells started, what Poe started, what all these other figures started. So I need to know them. And I think that's a good point. And so, again, I just think that having a discussion with Jack Kirby would be a fascinating way to spend a day or a week, or, and it depends. I mean, I'll get him whatever goes to eat. It's cool. We'll hang out. It's good. I'd do it. Love to do it. Also, get the story about what Stanley was really like before he became famous.
Mine's a little more lighthearted. I was going to go another way with it, and I think I don't want to. And this is out of left field, not as serious as the other two, but serious in the same reasons why I wanted to talk to the other two. Same desire. I can't imagine the stories that Jerry Reed would tell me haunting me.
Oh no, Jerry Reed was almost on my list. By the way,
Jerry Reed is my number 3 pick. I almost thought Burt, and I was like, no, dumbass, you don't want Burt Reynolds. You want either Dom DeLuise or Jerry Reed, and I would pick Jerry Reed. Not
His
only
stories would definitely be more entertaining.
not only is he a great singer, who I have his greatest hits, and my kid likes listening to him too. He's he's Jerry Reed. He just seems fun. And don't get me wrong, he probably is an asshole or all these other things, but I just would have liked to have hung out with Jerry Reed. And there's not as many interviews with Jerry Reed as there is with Burt Reynolds and Dom DeLuise.
no, but
Go looking for them. There's
it's the
some, but there's
fact
not as many.
Jerry Reed, as a musical performer, did something that very few other people can do, in that he had songs that were heartbreakingly serious, and he had songs that were a lot of fun, and he had songs that were borderline parody.
Yes.
And he did that all.
Yes.
And he did it well.
Yes. Yes. It's a lot of fun. I just think I don't have a lot to say other than if I had to pick, it'd be Jerry Reed.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's like I said, that's one of my honorable mentions is in that same vein. Just tell me stories, man. Just tell me stories.
All right. Let's do our honorable mentions.
By the way, Chad, real quick, I wanted to say
Yeah.
this, and I forgot to bring it up. Do you know what Jack Kirby actually did during the war?
No.
This is another reason I was like, I've got to talk to this man. So they found out he was an artist. So they would send him on reconnaissance missions, effectively as a spy, and have him go into areas that were still under enemy control because they found out he was an artist and he could draw maps. So he would sneak in and map out the territory so they could take it over better.
Oh, that's awesome.
How, I very rarely use this term, but how badass is that? I mean, like, a short Jewish guy going in and being like, no, no, I got this.
You know, Jack Kirby has had my respect for a long time, but you know why else he has my respect? I own his edition, his limited series run on Green Arrow from
Yeah,
back in the day.
no, and the fact he worked for every comic company ever. Like
Yeah,
everybody else would be a Stan Lee back. No, I only work for Marvel. Jack Kirby was like, Marvel's not paying me enough. I'm going to DC. Oh,
yeah.
DC's not paying me enough. Oh, Top started a comic company. All right, the Kirby verse will be over there if you need it.
I'll go where the money goes.
Yep, and there's a logic to that, especially at that time when a lot of comic companies were being quite rude to the old school creators. Anyway,
I'll break my honorable mentions into two topics: the Hollywood and then the history. Um, the first, I'll do the Hollywood first. He almost made the top three, but Lou Costello. God, I would love to be haunted by Lou Costello of
Yeah.
of Abbott and Costello fame. They're
me,
James has you know, the Marx Brothers, and
I
I
love the
also
Marx
love the
Brothers.
Marx Brothers as well. But I have a very huge fondness to Abbott and Costello. Always have ever since I was a kid. So Lou Costello, God, I love him. Um, Bill Paxton.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's still too soon, but
No, actually, I've never heard anyone say a negative word behind him.
no, neither have I. But I would just the stories. Uh, and then finally from the Hollywood side, he has always been a huge person from my childhood, Lou Gossett Jr.
Hmm.
All right, from the history side, I talked about one of the best presidents of all time. I also would like to be haunted by one of the worst presidents of all time. He is only slightly edged out by some current presidents. Warren G. Harding, guys. I would love to be haunted by Warren G. Harding.
Yeah.
You have no idea,
I
Joe.
know who he is. I just don't
Do you know
I don't have anything to add to it.
do you know the history of him?
A little bit, Chad.
Okay, there's the condensation.
No, I just know a little,
All
Chad.
right,
You
well,
go
we'll
ahead and
just
talk
skip it
about it.
again. Okay, Al Capone.
Oh
I
yeah.
I would love to be haunted by Al Capone. Now I know that sounds insane, but you know,
But I honestly, you know who I think I might want to be haunted by that would be a second place to Al Capone? His son.
I don't know anything about his son.
His son changed his name. His son only died recently. I
Seriously?
think within the past 10 years because his
Really?
son changed his name. Yeah, his son changed his name and wouldn't talk about it for a long time. And then when he died, all this stuff came out, and maybe more than 10 years. But I remember them making a press announcement, and literally the way they covered it was blah, blah, blah has passed away. And it literally went, you'll have no idea who that is, but you'll know his father. But if you watch Boardwalk Empire, the kid that's deaf or that has
Yeah.
hearing issues, it was actually his son. He did have issues, and he changed his name because he didn't want to be linked to his father. But the other thing that does come out that he talks about a little bit is that what you do see a little bit in Boardwalk Empire about him being really defensive of his son,
Yeah.
and is somewhat valid. So
All right. And then finally, again, just history wise, I like history of the Old West. I would love to be haunted by Bass Reeves and Nate Love, two of the African American cowboys from the Old West. Bass Reeves is mostly there's a show based on him on Paramount Plus now, but he's basically the first African American out marshal out in the West, and then Nate Love was like one of the first African American cowboys. He was like he was known as having a crack shot on the cattle drives. I would love to have it just to have him
I don't
on
know
it.
who Nate Love is. I never heard of Nate Love till then.
Yeah, you can look him up. All right, James.
I'm going to go with one because I think, much like you, I think there's so many of these people that are involved in entertainment that we'll never get. I don't think we'll see a biopic made of some of these people, but they have fascinating lives. And one that I'm learning more and more about because I've liked his music for a long time, and I like some of his other work as well. But much like Joe brought up Jerry Reed, I'm going to bring up my counter offer to that, Roger Miller. And I did not know Roger Miller's life was terrible growing up. Like he had to pick cotton, he had to do all this stuff that his family couldn't afford to have a phone until 1951 was the first time he got to see a phone. And I didn't realize this is useless trivia, but he was heavily involved in FFA in high school because agriculture was going to be his way out. And his cousin had gotten married,
Oh, King of the Road. I knew the name. I didn't know any songs he sung. Okay.
and her husband told him that he should do music and taught him his first guitar chords and bought him a fiddle. That cousin's husband was Sheb Woolley.
Oh,
Sheb Woolley got Roger Miller started, but he never could afford an instrument. He ended up having to sell the fiddle they bought him to make ends meet. And he wanted to be a singer-songwriter so bad, he stole a guitar at 17. But he didn't get caught. He would have got away with it. But he actually realized, nope, that's not the way I want to make my fortune. So he turned himself in. And the judge said, well, you got two choices, son. I'd either send you to prison for stealing or you can go to Korea. He opted to go to Korea.
hmm.
And so it was the military that actually launched his music career because he met other people that had music careers and eventually ended up working with somebody that would later be known as Johnny Paycheck and got into it that way. But so the fact that he intersected with Sheb Woolley through a cousin marrying him and all these different components, it's absolutely fascinating to me. But we get Johnny Cash, which we should. Johnny Cash is a huge figure. And that's another ghost that I would love to hang out with just to say, now tell me about the time you lived in the cave that your biopic doesn't talk about. Uh, but I think Roger Miller and a lot of these other figures, and we've talked about Joe and Chad, you all talked about the show On the Tour Bus.
Yeah. There's
Yeah,
a
the
good one
Mike
about
Judge
Johnny
Show.
Paycheck.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
wish it would have lasted more than one season.
But I think I think there's so many stories like this, and I think one of the things about so many of these, because another honorable mention would be BB King. Oh, I'd love to just tell me stories, BB. Just tell me what it was like. Tell me what it was like playing, on
The
the
chit
side of the road.
and on the Chitlin circuit.
Yeah, and just tell me. Let's do it. Let's hang out. And so the figures like that, Roger Miller. I mean, Roger Miller's probably biggest fame, his biggest success was the song "King of the
Yeah, the
Road."
road.
But probably most
Yeah, because
people
I'll
know
be
him
honest with
now,
you, I'm looking at the other songs up and I don't know any of them.
dude. You can't roller skate in a buffalo herd. Anyway, but probably most people know him now more for anything that because of Disney, because he's Alan
Yeah, his
Adele and
voiceover work.
the voiceover work and
Yeah.
and one episode of the Muppets. And so, but I think I think there's fascinating options for that. And I'll do one more historical one. I do think it would be fascinating to be able to talk to some of the figures that aren't the presidents, aren't the major figures that still had such a big impact.
Oh, I've heard it. I've heard the Buffalo Herd song. I
Yeah,
just didn't know that's what it was called.
yeah, yeah. It's a classic.
Is it?
What you need to listen to is My Uncle Used to Love Me, but She Died. That's a good one. It really is. It's a fun song. Um, but anyway,
Oh, Do Wackadoo. He sung Do
Do I Could Do,
Wackadoo.
yeah. He also did Whistle Stop, which now is known as the Hamster Dance, but it's originally he did it originally for
Oh, he
Robert.
did Whistle Stop.
Yeah, that's him.
Oh, this
That's
guy
what I'm
kicks.
saying. Yeah,
this guy kicks ass.
yes, exactly. He'd be fun to hang out with. Anyway, what was I saying? Where was? Oh, I think it would be really interesting.
Or are we just showing how white we really are?
Hey, dude, I picked
Both.
BB King.
Oh, is it?
What?
Whistle Stop is BB King?
No, I said I also picked BB King.
Oh, okay.
No, I think it would be really
Because
interesting.
I was like, Whistle Stop sounds nothing like BB King.
Dude, I bet he could do a cover of it that would rock. I bet.
Oh, me and Bobby McGee. I'm sorry, I'm gonna shut up now.
No, dude, he's everywhere. He's everywhere. He also wrote songs for a ton of people too. He doesn't get credit.
Yeah, but that one's written by Chris Christopherson.
Yeah.
Me and Bobby McGee is?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Because and then
Unless I missed something last time I checked.
I'm gonna look it up.
You do that.
While you're doing that, James, do you have your final?
I've now forgotten who I am and where.
All right. Well, I will go ahead and do.
It's written by Chris Christopherson and Fred L. Foster.
Oh, I did not know about the Foster dude.
Now you do.
My one, I'm kind of shocked that Chad didn't bring him up. And I'm not going to talk about it, but just because we're doing honorable mentions, Fatty Arbuckle.
Oh yeah.
I thought about it, but I honestly had no interest in being haunted by him.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm going to be, I pretty much pulled haunted people I'd want to talk to, so I wouldn't mind getting the scoop on all of that.
But you're hearing his side of the story, not the other person. So you would have to be haunted by both.
Okay. Not at the same time. It'll just be a fight. By the way, the other honorable mention, I lost the one I was going to say that was political, but it would be Mark Twain, because I want to know the real Mark Twain, because I read somewhere that his public persona was, of course, the Mark Twain that most people talk about and study.
You mean the Vanilla Ice version?
Yeah, that one, Chad. But that often behind the scenes he was riddled with insecurities, and he was always worried that nothing was going to work out. And I was like, that sounds familiar. It works out for him. I need some tips. Hey, Mark, get over here. So that's one that came to mind too.
All right. Well, this has been Bonehead Weekly, wanting to hang out with dead people.
See, we occasionally do paranormal adjacent topics that are also tied to things that we like.